Sometimes, the most important lessons about humanity happen in the most ordinary places, like a simple coffee shop on any given morning. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on a cold Tuesday in November in Oakland, and the Starbucks on Telegraph Avenue was already buzzing with the frenetic energy typical of the morning rush. You can sense that there's something magical about the morning ritual of big cities. Hundreds of people seeking that first dose of caffeine that connects them with the reality of a new day. The rich aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with steamed milk created a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted with the biting cold outside. Familiar sounds echoed throughout the space: the hiss of espresso machines, low conversations from drowsy customers, the constant tinkling of coins, and the comforting noise of cups being stacked. Among dozens of tired faces and still sleepy expressions, a tall and athletic figure quietly pushed through the glass door. Steph Curry wore a simple beanie, a basic black jacket, and worn sneakers. The perfect uniform for someone who genuinely wanted to go unnoticed on an ordinary morning. He carried something unusual for that hour: a handwritten sheet of paper, carefully folded, with approximately 30 items listed in neat handwriting. It's impossible not to feel curious when we see someone carrying such a detailed list in a coffee shop. On the other side of the counter, Jake Martinez nervously adjusted his green apron for the 10th time in the last hour. At 19 years old, this was only his 5th morning working alone during the busiest shift of the store. His fingers drummed anxiously on the counter while he checked the clock. Still 5 hours until his colleague would arrive to help. Jake had started working at Starbucks 3 weeks earlier, after spending months looking for a job. Not by choice, but out of urgent necessity. How many times in life are we pushed into situations that test us before we're even prepared? The pressure weighed on his young shoulders like an invisible backpack loaded with adult responsibilities. His mother, Carmen, was at home recovering from surgery, unable to work for at least 2 months. Bills were piling up on the kitchen table like cruel reminders that he was, temporarily, the family's sole breadwinner. Steph positioned himself patiently at the end of the line, observing the movement around him with that natural serenity that some people possess even in the most chaotic environments. He listened to fragments of morning conversations, executives discussing meetings, students complaining about exams, parents coordinating family schedules. What's most impressive is how a coffee shop becomes a microcosm of society, where different lives cross paths for a few minutes before heading in completely different directions. The line moved slowly. Jake tried to keep pace, but it was evident he was fighting against the clock and his own inexperience. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared complex drinks, drops of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "One large caramel macchiato with oat milk extra hot," shouted an impatient customer. "And please, don't take as long as the last one." Jake swallowed hard, nodded, and continued working, stress accumulating in his tense muscles like compressed springs about to snap. 15 minutes later, Steph finally reached the counter. He smiled gently at Jake and unfolded his handwritten list. "Good morning. I know it's a big order, but I need coffee for a very special team." Jake looked at the list and his expression changed immediately. 30 different orders. 2 large Americanos without sugar, 3 medium lattes with almond milk, 4 small cappuccinos with extra cinnamon, 2 caramel frappes. The list continued like an endless menu of complexity. "Are you kidding me?" Jake asked, his voice laden with irritation that had been building all morning. "This is going to take 40 minutes." Steph maintained his calm and respectful tone. "I understand it's a lot, but it's for the medical team at the children's hospital nearby. They've been working all night and..." I don't care if it's for the president, Jake interrupted, his patience finally running out like a dam bursting under pressure. His voice rose enough for other customers to stop their conversations and look toward the counter. The ambient sound of the coffee shop, conversations, machines, background, music, was momentarily overwhelmed by the growing tension between the two men who represented completely different worlds. "Get out of the way!" Jake exploded, pointing his finger at Steph with exaggerated authority fueled by desperation. "You're holding up the entire line. Everyone here is in a hurry, and you come with this ridiculous list, like you own the place." The words cut through the coffee shop air like an unexpected siren. Conversations stopped completely. Heads turned, and an embarrassing silence took over the environment. Steam from the espresso machines continued rising, but now it seemed to also carry the palpable tension of the moment. Steph remained motionless for a few seconds, processing not just the words, but the desperation behind them. His eyes caught details that others wouldn't notice. Jake's trembling hands, the exhaustion on his young face, the way his shoulders were curved under invisible weight. How many times in life are we attacked by people who are actually fighting battles we can't see? Instead of reacting with anger or indignation, Steph did something no one in line expected. He took a step back, calmly folded his list, and said with a gentleness that disarms any aggression, "You're right. Sorry for the trouble." But something in Steph's eyes suggested that this story was just beginning, and that Jake was about to discover that some people respond to rudeness in ways that transform not just moments, but entire lives. There are moments in life when accumulated pressure explodes in the wrong direction. And sometimes, the kindest person in the world becomes the target of pain that doesn't even belong to them. Steph remained where Jake had asked him to stay, but his expression revealed a respectful determination that only truly mature people can maintain in hostile situations. Can you perceive that there's a profound difference between retreating out of fear and retreating out of wisdom? Steph chose the second option, but wasn't willing to give up completely. "Jake," he said softly, reading the name on the young barista's badge, "I understand you're under pressure, but these coffees are really for the medical team at Oakland Children's Hospital. They saved a child's life last night, and I wanted to thank them." "I don't want to know!" Jake exploded, his voice echoing through the coffee shop like a desperate scream. "Everyone has a story. Everyone has an excuse. You think you're special? I don't care if it's for doctors, firefighters, or astronauts." Jake's face was red with frustration, veins bulging in his young neck, hands shaking with an intensity that went far beyond professional nervousness. It's impossible not to feel when someone is carrying much more weight than they can bear. The other customers in line began to speak up, but not in the way Steph expected. Morning impatience transformed some of them into impromptu judges of the situation. "Kid, the employee is right," grumbled an executive, in a suit, aggressively checking his watch. "You can't come here with a list of 30 orders during rush hour." "That's total inconsideration," agreed a middle-aged woman, shaking her head with disapproval. "Some of us have real jobs to get to." Steph heard each comment as if they were small stones being thrown in his direction, but what touched him most was observing how Jake absorbed both the pressure from customers and the responsibility of defending him against someone who, deep down, was just trying to do something kind. "You see?" Jake said, pointing to the irritated line behind Steph. "Everyone's in a hurry, and you come here with this ridiculous list, disrupting everyone's day." But there was something in Jake's eyes that Steph recognized immediately. It wasn't really anger. It was panic. The kind of panic that comes when someone too young is trying to carry responsibilities too heavy. How many times do we judge people's rudeness without understanding the circumstances that led them to that point of explosion? It was at this moment that Jake's mind was invaded by memories he tried to keep buried during work hours. 3 months ago, he was preparing to start college. He had plans, dreams, an entire life ahead of him. Then the phone rang on a Sunday morning. "Jake, it's about your father." His mother's voice had trembled through the phone. "He had a heart attack at work. The doctors said it was very quick." In a matter of seconds, Jake had gone from being a teenager worried about grades and dating to being the man of the family responsible for supporting a widowed and devastated mother. College was postponed indefinitely. Dreams were stored in a drawer that might never open again. What hurt most wasn't just the loss of his father, but the way life had changed overnight. Carmen, his mother, had fallen into a deep depression that left her unable to work most days. Jake woke up at 5 in the morning, worked 8 hours at Starbucks, came home to take care of his mother, and still tried to study online so as not to completely lose his educational plans. "You don't understand," Jake continued shouting at Steph, but his words carried much more than professional irritation. "I can't lose this job. I can't disappoint anyone else." Steph immediately perceived that this last sentence wasn't about customer service. It was about something much deeper and more painful. "Jake," Steph said, his voice becoming even softer, "this is your first week working alone, isn't it?" The question caught Jake off guard. How had this customer noticed? That's none of your business," he replied, but his voice lost part of its previous aggressiveness. "How old are you?" Steph asked gently, completely ignoring the hostility and focusing on the person behind the anger. 19, Jake answered automatically, then got irritated with himself for revealing personal information. "But that doesn't matter. I know how to do my job." Steph looked around the coffee shop, at the impatient customers, at the hissing machines, at the line that continued growing, and then returned his eyes to Jake with an understanding that cut through all the tension. "I know you do," Steph said calmly, "and I bet you're doing a much better job than you imagine. But can I ask, are you taking care of someone at home?" The question hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. How had this stranger guessed? Tears of frustration formed in his eyes, but he suppressed them forcefully. He couldn't cry at work. He couldn't show weakness. He couldn't be the 19-year-old boy he really was. "I don't need your pity," Jake fired back, but his voice was clearly choked up. "I just need you to get out of my way and let me work." The customers behind Steph began to get even more impatient. Some whispered among themselves, others checked their phones with irritation, and the coffee shop atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. "Look," said the executive in the ivory suit, "if you're not going to resolve this soon, I'm going to find another place to get coffee." "I have a meeting in 15 minutes, complained another person. "This is getting ridiculous." Steph realized he was about to become the villain of the situation in the eyes of the other customers, but something in Jake's silent desperation prevented him from simply leaving. There was a battle being fought in this young man that went far beyond coffee orders and morning lines. "All right," Steph said, finally, folding his list again. "I'll get out of your way." "But Jake," the young barista looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and emotional exhaustion. "You're doing a difficult job in a difficult situation, and that deserves respect, not criticism." Steph's words echoed through the coffee shop like an unexpected blessing. Jake felt something breaking inside his chest, not from pain, but from relief. When was the last time someone had recognized that he was struggling? But before Jake could respond, something happened that would completely change the course of that morning. A woman in line, who had been observing the entire interaction in silence, finally recognized the familiar voice that was trying to calm the situation. And what she whispered to the customer beside her would change everything. There are moments in life when reality hits us like lightning in a clear sky, and we discover that we attacked exactly who we should have protected. "My God," whispered Linda, a 45-year-old nurse who was 3 people behind Steph in line. "That's Steph Curry." The words were spoken quietly, but in the tense atmosphere of the coffee shop, they spread like invisible waves of recognition. Can you perceive that there are moments when a simple revelation of identity completely changes the energy of an environment? "Steph Curry?" repeated the man beside her, adjusting his glasses and looking more carefully. "The Warriors player?" "It's him," Linda confirmed, her voice laden with certainty and growing discomfort. "I recognized the voice. My son is his #1 fan." The information began to circulate through discreet whispers that characterize embarrassing discoveries in public spaces. "It's Steph Curry, the basketball player. That's Steph Curry over there." Each whisper was like a drop added to a bucket that was about to overflow. Jake continued behind the counter, oblivious to the recognition spreading among the customers. He was breathing heavily, trying to compose himself after the emotional explosion, still processing the kind words Steph had said. It's impossible not to feel when we're about to discover that our entire reality is about to be reorganized. The executive in the suit, who had criticized Steph minutes before, was the first to fully comprehend the magnitude of the embarrassment. His face paled when he realized he had been rude to one of the Bay Area's most beloved personalities. "Wait," he murmured to the woman beside him. "If he's really Steph Curry, then that list of 30 coffees was probably for some charity work," she completed, her own previous irritation transforming into growing shame. It was at this moment that the back door of the coffee shop opened, and Marcus Chen, the store manager, appeared carrying boxes of supplies. Marcus had worked at that Starbucks for 5 years and knew every regular customer, every unusual situation, and definitely recognized celebrities when he saw them. His eyes immediately found Steph, and his expression changed from casual curiosity to shocked recognition. "Holy God," he murmured, almost dropping the boxes he was carrying. "Jake," Marcus called urgently, approaching the counter with hurried steps. "Jake, do you know who this customer is?" Jake looked confusedly between Marcus and Steph, still not fully understanding what was happening. It's a customer who had a big list of orders." "Jake," Marcus said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "This is Steph Curry. The Steph Curry, 3-time NBA champion, greatest Warriors player." The words hit Jake like an emotional tsunami. Blood completely drained from his face, his knees trembled, and he had to lean on the counter to keep from collapsing. How many times in life do we discover that we've made a mistake that cannot be undone? "No," Jake whispered, his voice being just a desperate breath. No, I didn't know." Steph observed Jake's reaction with a compassion that disarms any judgment. "Jake, it's okay." "It's not okay," Jake exploded. But this time, it wasn't anger. It was pure despair. "I yelled at you. I humiliated you in front of everyone. My God, what have I done?" Marcus turned to Steph with an expression of profound professional humiliation. "Mr. Curry, I'm so sorry. This is absolutely unacceptable. Jake is in his first month of work. He didn't know." "Marcus," Steph interrupted gently, "you don't need to apologize for him. We all have difficult days." But Jake couldn't stop the downward spiral of shame and regret. Tears began to stream down his young face as the magnitude of his actions settled like a crushing weight on his chest. "Mr. Curry," Jake said between sobs, When my father was alive, he used to take me to watch your games. He said you were an example of how to be a real man, humble, hard-working, dedicated to family." The words came out stumbling over each other, as if Jake needed to confess everything before it was too late. "After he died, I would watch your interviews when I felt lost. You always talked about persistence, about not giving up when things get tough." Steph felt his own heart tighten. What's most impressive is how sometimes we become symbols of hope for people we don't even know exist. "And I yelled at you," Jake continued, his voice breaking completely. "The person my father admired most, who helped me get through the most difficult moments. And I treated you like trash." Linda, the nurse who had first recognized Steph, approached the counter. "Mr. Curry," she said respectfully, "may I ask, that list of 30 coffees was for whom?" Steph looked at Jake, who was now clearly devastated, and decided it was time for the whole truth to come out. "It was for the medical team at Oakland Children's Hospital," he explained calmly. "Last night, they saved the life of a 7-year-old child I know, Marcus, who is the son of a family friend. The doctors and nurses worked 16 hours straight to save him." The silence that followed was deafening. Each person in the coffee shop processed the fact that they had witnessed, and some had even participated in, the humiliation of someone who was trying to thank professionals who save lives. "I wanted to bring them coffee before the shift change," Steph continued, "because I know that small gestures sometimes mean a lot to people who dedicate their lives to caring for others." Jake collapsed completely. He covered his face with his hands and cried without any attempt to maintain professional composure. "I'm trash," he murmured between his fingers. "I'm exactly the kind of person my father didn't want me to become." "Jake," Steph said firmly, walking around the counter to be close to the young man, "stop that. You're not trash. You're a 19-year-old boy carrying the responsibilities of a 40-year-old man, and you're doing the best you can." Marcus watched in total shock. In 5 years, managing that store, he had never witnessed anything like this. "Mr. Curry, I don't know what to say. Obviously, we'll process all your orders for free, and Jake will be nothing but understood," Steph interrupted, with a gentle authority that admitted no discussion. "He was protecting his customers, doing his job. The fact that he's under personal pressure doesn't make him less human." Jake looked at Steph through his tears, unable to comprehend how someone he had attacked was defending him. "But," Steph continued, looking directly into Jake's eyes, "I want to teach you something my father taught me when I was your age." And in that moment, in an ordinary Starbucks in Oakland, a lesson about redemption was about to be taught in a way that no one in that coffee shop would ever forget. Some of the most powerful lessons about human greatness are not taught in inspirational speeches, but in ordinary coffee shops, by extraordinary people who choose to respond to pain with love. Steph moved even closer to Jake, who continued with his face covered by his hands, trembling with the force of shame that seemed to want to consume him entirely. The entire coffee shop watched in respectful silence, as if everyone felt they were about to witness something sacred. Can you perceive that there are moments when the world stops to watch a soul being rebuilt? "Jake," Steph said softly, placing a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "Look at me." Jake slowly raised his head, his red and swollen eyes meeting Steph's. "Mr. Curry, I don't deserve for you to be kind to me. Do you know what my father told me when I was your age and made a mistake I thought would ruin my life?" Steph asked, his voice laden with a quiet wisdom that comes from someone who has weathered storms and emerged stronger. Jake shook his head, unable to speak. He said, "Steph, the greatness of a man is not measured by how many times he falls. It's measured by how he gets up, and more importantly, by how he helps others get up after they've fallen." The words echoed through the coffee shop like a shared prayer. It's impossible not to feel when someone is offering not just forgiveness, but a path to redemption. Steph turned to Marcus, who was still processing the entire situation in silent shock. "Marcus, how many customers do you have in the store now?" About 15, more or less," Marcus replied hesitantly. "Perfect," Steph said, taking his wallet from his pocket. "I want to pay for everyone's coffee who's here today, and Jake is going to process all the orders." Jake looked at Steph as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Mr. Curry?" "You heard right," Steph confirmed with a smile that carried all the warmth in the world. "Everyone deserves to start their day well, and you deserve the chance to serve these people in the incredible way I know you're capable of." What's most impressive is how gestures of generosity can instantly transform the energy of an entire environment. Linda, the nurse who had first recognized Steph, approached the counter with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Curry," she said, "I work at the same hospital where you were taking the coffees. Last night's team. They saved not just Marcus, but 2 other children during that shift." "Do you know the team?" Steph asked, genuinely interested. "I do, and I can guarantee they'll be moved to know that someone thought of them this way," Linda replied. "Rarely does anyone recognize the work we do." Steph turned again to Jake. "How about after your shift, you come with me to the hospital? I want you to meet the people those coffees were intended for." Jake seemed unable to process so much kindness. But I don't deserve—" "Jake," Steph interrupted firmly, "stop saying you don't deserve good things. You're a 19-year-old young man who lost his father and is fighting to support his mother. That's not shame. That's heroism." Marcus watched the entire interaction with an expression of growing admiration. "Mr. Curry, I can say that in 5 years working here, I've never seen anything like this." "And there's more," Steph continued, looking directly at Jake. "Marcus told me you're working to save money for college. What course do you want to take?" Jake wiped his eyes with his shirt sleeve. "Medicine. I wanted to be a doctor like the ones who cared for my father. Even though they couldn't save him, they were so kind to our family." The connection was perfect and devastatingly beautiful. How many times does the universe conspire to connect people who need each other? "Jake," Steph said, his voice laden with genuine emotion, "my foundation offers scholarships for young people in situations like yours. If you want, I can help you get a full scholarship for medicine." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the soft sound of coffee machines and Jake's emotional breathing. He looked at Steph, then at Marcus, then at the customers, who watched the scene with teary eyes. "Why?" Jake asked, his voice being just a whisper. "Why are you doing this for me after what I did?" Steph smiled, and that smile carried years of wisdom, losses, victories, and above all, understanding of what really matters in life. "Because when I was your age, Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And because your father was right, you really can be an example of how to be a real man." Jake couldn't contain himself anymore. He walked around the counter and hugged Steph with the desperate gratitude of someone who had just been saved from drowning. And Steph hugged him back, like an older brother would hug a younger brother who had finally found his way. The customers in the store began to applaud spontaneously. Not a forced or ceremonious applause, but the genuine recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary, the real transformation of a human life. 3 hours later, Jake had prepared not only the original 30 coffees for the hospital, but also the orders for all the store customers, each one paid for by Steph. And each coffee was prepared with attention and care that transformed simple beverages into small acts of love. When they arrived at Oakland Children's Hospital, Jake met Dr. Sarah Martinez, the doctor who had led the team that saved little Marcus. "Thank you for the coffees," she said, "but more importantly, thank you for remembering that our work matters." "I want to be part of this," Jake said to Steph as they watched the medical team. "I want to save lives like they do." "You will," Steph replied with absolute certainty. "And when you graduate, I want to be at your graduation." 6 months later, Jake had become the most beloved employee at the Telegraph Avenue Starbucks. Customers came specifically to be served by him, not just because of the story that had spread, but because of the genuine kindness that now radiated from every interaction. On the wall behind the counter, Marcus hung a photo, Jake and Steph at the hospital, delivering coffees to the medical team, both smiling like old friends. And every morning, when Jake arrived at work, he read a small plaque that Steph had made. Real greatness is not measured by how we react when we are respected, but by how we respond when we are disrespected. Steph continued visiting the store regularly, not as a celebrity, but as a mentor and friend. And every time he saw Jake prepare a coffee with the care of someone who understands that small acts of service are, in fact, great acts of love, he smiled, remembering his father's words. Because in the end, Jake had learned the most important lesson of all, that our response to adversity defines not only who we are, but who we can become. And sometimes, the greatest transformations begin with the smallest kindnesses, offered by extraordinary people who choose to respond to pain with healing, to disrespect with dignity, and to shame with a second chance.